A father's love is supposed to be unconditional. Morgana's had a price tag, $40,000 and a clean slate at the card tables. That was all it took for Jason to hand his only daughter over to a man who measured life in ledgers and bullet casings. She expected the worst. A basement. A monster. But what Roman Costa did when he finally locked the bedroom door behind them, it shattered everything she thought she knew about monsters. The kitchen smelled of stale beer and rotting onions. It always did. Morgana stood by the sink, gripping the edge of the chipped formica counter until her knuckles turned white. The dripping faucet kept a steady, agonizing rhythm. Drop, drop, drop. Across the room, her father sat at the rickety dining table. Jason was a small man, made smaller by the weight of his own chronic failures. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. He didn't look at her. He hadn't looked her in the eye since the black SUV pulled up onto the dead grass of their front lawn 20 minutes ago. The man sitting opposite Jason didn't belong in a house with peeling linoleum and unpaid heating bills. His name was Roman Costa. Roman wore a dark wool suit that probably cost more than the house itself. He sat perfectly still. He didn't fidget. He didn't smoke. He simply looked at the piece of paper resting on the table between them. His hands resting on the table were large, the knuckles lightly scarred, a heavy gold watch peeking out from his cuff. 40,000! Jason muttered, his voice cracking. He took a drag of the cigarette, the cherry burning violently. That clears the books, the poker debt, the loan from last Tuesday, all of it. With interest, Roman said. His voice was a low baritone, rough like gravel grinding under a tire. It wasn't a threat. It was just a statement of fact. Right with interest. Jason finally cast a fleeting, watery glance toward the sink, toward his daughter. And she settles it. Morgana's stomach hollowed out. A cold, leaden weight dropped into her pelvis. She had known things were bad. The bruises on Jason's ribs from 2 weeks ago had told her that. The disconnected phone line had confirmed it. But this... She was 22. She worked double shifts at a diner by the interstate to keep the electricity on. She patched the holes in the drywall when Jason threw bottles at them. She had survived him. And now he was selling her to survive himself. She settles it. Roman echoed. He didn't look at Morgana like a predator. He didn't lick his lips or stare at her chest. He looked at her the same way a man might look at a used car he was taking in as collateral. Calculating. Cold. Detached. She's a good girl, Jason stammered, leaning forward, eager to sell the product now that the deal was struck. Quiet. Keeps things clean. Doesn't complain. You can... Shut up, Jason! Roman didn't raise his voice, but the words hit the room like a physical blow. Jason's mouth snapped shut. Roman slowly stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He finally turned his full attention to Morgana. His eyes were dark, an unreadable shade of brown framed by exhaustion. "Pack your things," he said to her. Morgana didn't move. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab the heavy cast-iron skillet from the drying rack and swing it at both of their heads. But years of living with Jason had taught her that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. Survival meant silence. Survival meant compliance. "I don't have much," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded thin, frail. It disgusted her. "Take what you need," Roman replied. "You have 10 minutes. She walked past her father without a word. Jason reached out a trembling hand, brushing her elbow. "Morgana, honey, I had to. You understand, right? They were gonna break my legs. They were gonna kill me." She stopped. She didn't look at him. She just stared at his yellowed fingernails resting on her cheap cotton sleeve. "I hope they still do," she whispered. Jason yanked his hand back as if he'd been burned. Morgana climbed the narrow, creaking stairs to her bedroom. The room was freezing. She pulled a duffel bag from under her mattress. She didn't pack the clothes Jason had bought her. She packed her uniforms, 2 pairs of jeans, a handful of worn sweaters, a framed photograph of a mother she barely remembered, her toothbrush. When she came back downstairs 9 minutes later, Jason was staring at the wall. Roman was waiting by the front door. He opened it. The biting November wind howled into the living room, bringing the smell of impending snow and car exhaust. Morgana stepped out onto the porch. She didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind her, severing the only life she had ever known. The SUV was a fortress on wheels, tinted windows, heavy armored doors. Morgana sat in the back, her duffel bag clutched to her chest like a shield. Roman sat beside her. There was at least 2 feet of heavy leather seating between them, but his presence swallowed all the oxygen in the cabin. In the driver's seat, a massive man with a thick neck and a shaved head steered the vehicle through the city streets. He hadn't said a word since they left the house. Morgana stared out the window. The neon signs of her neighborhood liquor stores, pawn shops, 24-hour laundromats blurred into streaks of red and yellow. She was trying to calculate her odds. If she opened the door at a red light, could she run? Would the driver shoot her? Would Roman even bother chasing her? Or would he just go back and kill Jason? The doors are locked from the front, Roman said. Morgana flinched, pulling the bag tighter against her. He hadn't even looked away from his phone, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. I wasn't going to run, she lied. You were calculating the distance to the alleyway we just passed, he replied, turning off his phone and sliding it into his breast pocket. He finally turned his head to look at her. In the passing streetlights, his face was a landscape of harsh shadows. Running would be stupid, not because I'd hurt you, but because it's 20 degrees outside and you're wearing a denim jacket. Morgana tightened her jaw. Where are you taking me? Home. Whose home? Mine. The word hung in the air. Mine. Morgana's mind raced through a Rolodex of nightmares. She knew who Roman Costa was. Everyone in the city did. He ran the ports, he ran the unions. If a crate came off a ship without his tax, people ended up at the bottom of the river. He wasn't a pimp, but men with that kind of power took what they wanted, and her father had literally handed her over. What do you want from me? She asked. Her voice trembled, betraying the stoic front she was trying to build. Roman studied her for a long moment. He took in her frayed collar, the purple bruising around her left wrist where Jason had grabbed her a few days prior, the absolute terror swimming in her eyes. He looked away. I want you to sit quietly until we get there. The rest of the drive passed in suffocating silence. The cityscape shifted from crumbling brick and graffiti to towering glass and immaculate landscaping. They drove up into the hills, winding along a private road until they reached a pair of heavy iron gates. The gates parted silently, letting the SUV glide onto a sweeping driveway. The house was not a sprawling, ostentatious mansion. It was modern. Concrete dark wood and massive panels of bulletproof glass overlooking the city below. It looked like a bunker disguised as architectural art. The driver parked. Roman stepped out and didn't wait to open her door. The driver did that. Morgana stepped onto the freezing pavement, her worn sneakers slipping slightly on a patch of ice. She hugged herself, shivering violently as the wind bit through her jacket. Inside, Roman said, walking ahead of her. She followed. What choice did she have? The interior of the house was warm, smelling of cedar and expensive, subtle cologne. The floors were dark hardwood. The walls were bare of art. It was spotless, clinical, and completely devoid of warmth. Roman unbuttoned his coat and threw it over the back of a leather sofa. He looked at the driver. Hayes, lock down the perimeter. I'm turning in. Yes, boss. Hayes disappeared down a hallway. Roman turned to Morgana. She was standing frozen on the entryway rug, terrified to track dirt onto the pristine floor. "Follow me," he said. He led her up a floating glass staircase. Morgana's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the part where the transaction was finalized. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, silently cursing Jason to hell, praying she could just dissociate, go numb, and let whatever was about to happen happen. Roman stopped at the end of the hall. He pushed open a heavy oak door and flipped a switch. Soft, warm light flooded the room. It was a bedroom. A massive king-sized bed with thick white duvets, a large window overlooking the city, a door leading to an ensuite bathroom. "This is your room," Roman said. Morgana stood in the doorway, her knuckles aching from gripping her bag. She waited for him to walk in. She waited for him to take off his suit jacket to tell her to undress. He didn't move. He stood in the hallway looking at her. "Bathroom has towels. Closet has some clothes. They probably won't fit perfectly, but they're clean." Roman pointed to the inside of the door. "There's a lock. Use it." Morgana blinked. The words didn't compute. "What? The door?" Roman repeated slowly, as if talking to a panicked animal. "It locks from the inside. Turn the deadbolt. Go to sleep." He turned on his heel and started walking away. "Wait," Morgana blurted out. Roman stopped, looking back over his shoulder. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking badly now. The adrenaline was crashing. "My father sold me to you." Roman's expression darkened. It was the first time she saw genuine anger on his face, but it wasn't directed at her. "Your father is a parasite," Roman said quietly. "He owed me 40 grand. If he didn't pay it today, my associates were going to put him in the ground. To save his own skin, he offered me the only thing he had left. You. And you took it. I took it." Roman turned fully to face her. "Because I know who Jason's other creditors are. The Volkov brothers. He owed them 20 grand. He was going to offer you to them tomorrow when they came to collect." Morgana felt the blood drain from her face. The Volkovs didn't just hurt people. They disappeared them. They ran the trafficking rings out of the eastern seaboard. "I bought his debt," Roman continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "You aren't a slave. You aren't a whore. You're an employee. You're going to clean this house, you're going to cook, and you're going to earn your keep until that 40,000 is paid off. Minimum wage minus room and board. It'll take you a few years." Morgana was dizzy. The walls felt like they were tilting. "You bought me to make me a maid. I bought you because I needed my books balanced and I didn't want to shoot your father in his living room." Roman shoved his hands into his pockets. "Lock the door, Morgana. Breakfast is at 7. He walked away, his footsteps disappearing down the long hall. Morgana stepped into the bedroom. She dropped her duffel bag on the plush carpet. She pushed the heavy oak door shut. With trembling fingers, she reached out and twisted the brass deadbolt. Click. She sank down against the wood, pulling her knees to her chest, and for the first time in 10 years, she cried. Not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming weight of a locked door. Sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bright and blinding. Morgana woke with a gasp, her heart racing as her eyes darted around the unfamiliar room. The panic lasted for 3 brutal seconds before the memories of the previous night washed over her. She looked down. She was still wearing her jeans and her worn sweater. She had fallen asleep on top of the covers, too exhausted to even crawl under the duvet. She stood up, her muscles aching from the tension she carried. She walked into the bathroom. It was larger than her entire apartment had been. Marble counters, a massive glass shower, neatly folded white towels that felt incredibly soft. She washed her face with cold water, staring at her reflection. Dark circles bruised the skin under her hazel eyes. Her brown hair was a tangled mess. She looked like a ghost. Breakfast is at 7. She checked the digital clock on the bedside table. 6:45 a.m. Morgana quickly brushed her hair, smoothed down her wrinkled clothes, and unlocked the bedroom door. The house was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in places insulated by extreme wealth. She navigated her way back down the floating glass staircase, following the faint smell of coffee. She found the kitchen. It was an industrial-grade space, sleek stainless steel and dark granite. Roman was already there. He was dressed down today. A black turtleneck and dark slacks. He stood by the espresso machine watching a dark stream of coffee fill a small ceramic cup. He didn't look like a mob boss this morning. He looked like a tired architect. "Morning," he said, not turning around. Morgana froze near the island counter. "Good morning." He turned, taking a sip of the espresso. His eyes scanned her quickly, noting the slept-in clothes. "There's fresh coffee in the carafe. Mugs are in the cabinet on your left." Morgana moved stiffly. She found a mug, poured the black coffee, and wrapped her cold hands around the ceramic. She didn't know what to do with herself. Should she sit, wait for orders, drink? He said, gesturing to one of the bar stools. She sat down cautiously on the edge of the leather seat. The coffee was bitter strong and incredibly good. "Hayes will take you into town this afternoon," Roman said, pulling a tablet onto the counter and swiping through something that looked like a spreadsheet. "You need clothes, uniforms for cleaning, everyday wear, whatever you need. Put it on the card he gives you." "I don't need—" "You're wearing yesterday's jeans," Roman interrupted smoothly without looking up. "I run a clean house. That includes the people in it. It's not a request." Morgana bit her lip. The instinct to argue flared up, a defense mechanism honed by years of surviving Jason. "Is the cost of the clothes added to my debt?" Roman paused. His finger stopped mid-swipe on the tablet. He looked up at her, really looked at her. "No. Consider it a signing bonus." He went back to his tablet. Morgana took another sip of coffee. The silence was stretching thick and awkward. She needed to understand the parameters of this cage. "Mr. Costa, Roman." "Roman." She corrected the name, feeling heavy on her tongue. "Why am I really here? You don't need a maid. You have men with guns guarding your front door. You have enough money to hire a whole staff of professionals. You didn't buy a $40,000 debt to get someone to scrub your toilets." Roman set the tablet down. The casual atmosphere evaporated instantly. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. The muscles in his forearms shifted under the dark fabric. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't need a maid." "Then what do you need?" "I need leverage," he said, his voice flat. "Your father is a degenerate gambler, but he's also a foreman at the Southern Docks. He holds the manifest keys. He's been taking bribes from a rival crew to let their shipments pass through my territory undetected." Morgana felt a chill creep up her spine. Jason wasn't just gambling. He was stealing from the mob. "I found out 2 days ago." Roman continued. "In my line of work, the penalty for that is death. No trial, no negotiations. You steal from me, you go in the ground." Morgana's hands shook the coffee rippling in her mug. "So why is he still alive?" "Because if I kill him, the Port Authority launches an investigation. The feds start sniffing around the docks. It halts my operations. It costs me millions. I needed him alive, but I needed him terrified. I needed to own him completely." Roman held her gaze, unflinching. "Taking his daughter, taking the one piece of property he actually values that ensures his loyalty. He'll stamp my manifests, he'll keep his mouth shut, and he'll never take a dime from my rivals again because he knows I have you." Morgana absorbed the blow. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't a charity case saved from the Volkovs. She was a hostage. Strangely, the truth settled her stomach. This, she understood. Transactional cruelty. It made sense. So as long as he behaves, I stay alive. Morgana clarified, her voice eerily calm. Roman's eyes narrowed slightly. He seemed surprised by her lack of hysterics. As long as he behaves, you stay comfortable. Nobody touches you. You cook, you clean, you live a quiet life. When his usefulness at the docks ends, your debt is wiped and you walk away. And if he doesn't behave... Roman didn't answer immediately. He looked at her pale face, at the fading bruise on her wrist. He'll behave, Roman said, finally picking up his espresso cup. He's a coward, and cowards always protect themselves. You're wrong about one thing, Morgana said softly. Roman raised an eyebrow. Oh, you said you took the one thing he values. Morgana looked down at her coffee mug, a bitter, hollow smile touching her lips. He doesn't value me. If they offered him enough money to betray you, he'd let you kill me. He wouldn't even come to the funeral. Silence descended on the kitchen. Roman didn't dismiss her words. He didn't offer a platitude. He just watched her analyzing the profound, broken honesty in her eyes. Then let's hope for your sake they don't make him an offer, Roman said quietly. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with a cage made of glass and a lock she controlled from the inside. The shopping trip was exactly as Roman had described it, a silent, efficient transaction. Hayes drove her to a mid-tier department store on the edge of the affluent suburbs. He didn't follow her into the aisles, but he stood by the sliding glass doors, a massive, unmovable object, with his hands folded in front of his belt. Morgana moved through the racks quickly. She didn't buy silk or cashmere. She bought heavy cotton t-shirts, dark denim, and sensible canvas shoes. For her uniform, she selected plain black scrubs. They were cheap, durable, and they clearly defined her role in the Costa house. When she handed Hayes the stack of clothes at the register, he simply swiped a heavy black card. The cashier looked terrified. Hayes didn't even blink. By Tuesday, Morgana had established a routine. Routine was a survival tactic. If she kept her hands moving, her brain couldn't spiral into panic. She woke at 6. She cleaned the kitchen, scrubbing the granite countertops until they gleamed. She vacuumed the massive living room. She did laundry. The house was already immaculate, maintained by professional crews before her arrival, but Morgana cleaned with a manic intensity. She bleached the grout in the guest bathrooms. She polished the baseboards. It gave her something she desperately needed, a sense of territory. Roman was a phantom during the daylight hours. He left before 8, driven away in the armored SUV, and rarely returned before nightfall. When he was home, he was locked in his home office, the heavy double doors firmly shut. They didn't speak. He didn't demand her attention, and she made sure not to offer it, until Thursday night. A fierce winter storm had rolled over the city, lashing freezing rain against the bulletproof glass of the house. Morgana was in the kitchen at midnight. She couldn't sleep. The wind howling against the house sounded too much like her father screaming in a drunken rage. She was wiping down the inside of the refrigerator when the front door opened. She froze the sponge dripping soapy water onto the linoleum. Heavy, irregular footsteps echoed in the foyer. Roman walked into the kitchen. He didn't look like the untouchable boss who had bought her a few days ago. His tie was gone. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and the left sleeve was rolled up to the elbow. A stark, bright smear of crimson soaked the cuff of his right sleeve. Morgana stopped breathing. She backed away from the fridge, pressing her spine against the cool, stainless steel. Roman stopped when he saw her. His breathing was slightly elevated. He looked down at his bloodied sleeve, then back at her. The harsh overhead lights cast deep shadows under his eyes. "Go to your room, Morgana," he said. His voice was exhausted, devoid of anger. She didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the blood. "Are you hurt? It's not my blood." The admission was blunt. It hit the sterile kitchen air like a dropped stone. He walked to the sink, turning on the cold water. He shoved his hands under the stream, aggressively scrubbing a faint red stain from his knuckles. Morgana watched the water swirl pink down the drain. The reality of who he was, what he did to maintain this house, this power crashed over her. "I told you to go to your room," he repeated, turning off the tap. He grabbed a paper towel and dried his hands. "I couldn't sleep," she said. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to stand her ground. Shrinking away from violent men only made them angrier. She had learned that the hard way. "I was cleaning." Roman looked around the kitchen. He noticed the gleaming fridge shelves, the perfectly aligned spice racks. He looked back at her, taking in her black scrubs and damp hands. "The house is clean, Morgana. You've been scrubbing the same floors for 3 days." He tossed the paper towel into the trash. "You don't have to perform for me. I'm not going to hit you if there's dust on the mantel." She flinched. The casual way he pinpointed her trauma felt invasive. "I clean because I want to—" She shot back, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. "It's the only thing in this house I can control." Roman paused. The irritation in his posture slowly bled away. He leaned against the counter, suddenly looking incredibly tired. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crushed pack of cigarettes, and lit one. He took a long drag, the cherry glowing fiercely in the dim light. "Fair enough," he murmured, exhaling a thin stream of grey smoke toward the ceiling. He didn't offer her one. He didn't ask her about her day. He just stood there, smoking in his own kitchen with a man's blood on his cuff, sharing the quiet with her. Morgana should have walked away. The smart, safe play was to retreat to her room and lock the heavy oak door. But the oppressive silence of the house had been gnawing at her all week. She walked over to the espresso machine. She grabbed a clean rag and began wiping down the chrome siding. "Did someone try to steal from you again?" she asked quietly. Roman looked at her, his dark eyes narrowing slightly through the smoke. "A crew down at the South Port thought they could reroute a shipment of electronics without paying the transit tax." "So you hurt them." "I explained the economic realities of operating in my territory," Roman replied flatly. "Violence is a tool, Morgana. It's loud, it's messy, and it brings police attention. I only use it when diplomacy fails. Tonight, diplomacy failed." "And my father?" she asked the question, slipping out before she could stop it. "Is he playing diplomat?" Roman took another drag. He crushed the cigarette out in a small ceramic dish next to the sink. "Your father stamped 3 of my manifests this morning. He's clocking in on time. He's sober. For a man who sold his daughter to save his legs, he's remarkably productive." It was a cruel thing to say, but Morgana appreciated the lack of pity. Pity was useless. "He'll slip," Morgana said, scrubbing a non-existent stain on the chrome. "He can't handle pressure. When things get tight, Jason looks for the exit. He always has." "Let me worry about Jason," Roman said. He pushed off the counter. "Leave the kitchen. Go to sleep. If you need something to control tomorrow, the library shelves haven't been dusted." He walked out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps retreating up the stairs. Morgana stood alone in the bright, sterile room. The smell of his cigarette smoke lingered in the air, masking the scent of bleach. She looked down at her hands. They had stopped shaking. The call came 2 weeks later. It was 3 in the morning. Morgana was abruptly pulled from a deep sleep by the sound of shattering glass. She sat bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. The house was usually tomb-silent at night. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood. She crept to her bedroom door, pressing her ear against the heavy oak. Downstairs, voices were shouting. Not the controlled, low murmurs of Roman's men. This was frantic. Angry. "He's gone, boss! The whole trailer is cleared out!" That was Miller, one of Roman's lieutenants. A heavy thud echoed through the floorboards, followed by the sound of something wooden snapping. Morgana carefully unlocked her door. She cracked it open just enough to see down the hallway toward the top of the glass staircase. Roman was standing in the foyer below. He was wearing black sweatpants and a t-shirt completely barefoot. He looked dangerous. The restrained, calculated businessman was gone. This was the man who owned the city. Hayes stood near the front door, snow melting off his heavy coat. "How long ago?" Roman demanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "Maybe 4 hours." Hayes replied gruffly. "The Volkovs sent a crew to the docks. They bypassed our patrol route. Jason let them through the eastern gate. They moved 2 containers of military-grade hardware out before the shift change." Morgana's stomach plummeted. Jason let them through. "Where is he?" Roman asked. "Gone," Miller said, pacing aggressively across the rug. "The Volkovs paid him out. We checked his rat hole house. Completely empty. He took the cash and skipped town. He knew you'd kill him." Morgana leaned against the doorframe, her vision blurring. Her father had done it. He had taken the Volkovs' money. He had betrayed Roman. If they offered him enough money to betray you, he'd let you kill me. Her own words from 2 weeks ago echoed in her head. She had warned Roman. She had told him Jason didn't care about her. But knowing it and living it were 2 entirely different things. Her father had signed her death warrant for a pile of cash. Down in the foyer, the silence was heavy, suffocating. Miller stopped pacing. He looked up the staircase directly toward the hallway where Morgana's room was. "So what do we do about the girl?" Morgana stopped breathing. She gripped the edge of the door, waiting for the execution order. This was how the mob worked. Blood for blood. Leverage only worked if you were willing to destroy it when the terms were broken. "She's a loose end now, boss." Hayes added, his voice completely devoid of malice. It was just business. "Jason broke the deal. We have to send a message. If the city finds out a junkie foreman crossed you and you didn't retaliate, it looks weak." Roman stood perfectly still. He stared at the shattered pieces of a ceramic vase he had clearly thrown against the wall moments earlier. "Bring her down," Miller suggested. "We can take her to the warehouse, film it, send the tape to the Volkovs and whatever hole Jason is hiding in. Let them know what happens when they cross the coasters." Morgana squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't cry. She just felt a profound, heavy numbness. She looked around her bedroom. There were no weapons. The window was a 30-foot drop onto concrete. Running was impossible. She stepped back from the door. She would not let them drag her out from under the bed. If she was going to die tonight, she would walk down those stairs herself. She pulled her bedroom door open. Before she could take a step out of the hallway, Roman's voice echoed up the stairwell. It was quiet, but it commanded the room completely. "Nobody touches the girl." Morgana froze. Below, Miller blinked, clearly confused. "Boss Jason burned us. He stole from you. The collateral is forfeit." I said. Roman repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "Nobody touches her." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Roman, with respect, that's not how this works. You keep her alive, you look soft. The Volkovs will use it. They'll say you don't have the stomach to punish a traitor." Roman turned slowly. He looked at Hayes, then at Miller. The sheer predatory weight of his glare made both men take a half-step back. "Are you questioning my stomach, Hayes?" Roman asked softly. "No, boss. Just laying out the optics." "Fuck the optics." Roman ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "Jason is a dead man. Put a bounty on him. 50 grand to whoever brings him to me breathing. 100 if they bring me his head in a box. I don't care. But the girl has nothing to do with this." "She's his daughter," Miller argued weakly. "She's a maid." Roman snapped, his patience snapping. She scrubs the floors, she makes the coffee. She told me 2 weeks ago that her father would sell her out, and she was right. Punishing a girl who already knew she was abandoned proves nothing except that I'm a sadist. He pointed a finger at Miller. You don't look at her. You don't speak to her. If I find out either of you so much as breathed heavy in her direction, to prove a point, I won't just kill you. I will dismantle you. Do you understand? Miller swallowed hard. Understood. Get out. Roman ordered. Find Jason. Find the Volkov shipment. Tear the east side apart if you have to. The two men didn't hesitate. They turned and walked out the front door, disappearing into the freezing night. Roman stood alone in the foyer. He let out a long, ragged exhale, rolling his shoulders to release the tension. He looked up. Morgana was standing at the top of the glass staircase. Her hands were gripping the metal railing so tightly her knuckles were translucent. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt, shivering slightly in the cool air of the house. Roman stared at her. He didn't look surprised that she had been listening. Go back to bed, Morgana, he said quietly. She walked slowly down the stairs. Each step felt incredibly loud in the empty house. She didn't stop until she reached the bottom, standing only a few feet away from him. Why? She asked. Her voice was cracked, barely a whisper. Hayes was right. It makes you look weak. Why didn't you let them take me? Roman looked down at her. He saw the terror she was trying to hide, the absolute disbelief in her hazel eyes. He stepped closer, stopping just before their personal space overlapped. Because I bought your debt. Roman said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Jason didn't honor his end of the contract, but I honor mine. You work here. You're my responsibility. And I protect what's mine. He reached out his large, scarred hand, hovering in the air for a second, before he gently brushed a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm against her freezing skin. No one is going to hurt you in this house, Morgana, he said, his eyes locking onto hers with absolute terrifying sincerity. I suggest you start believing that. He dropped his hand, turned, and walked toward his office, leaving her standing in the foyer entirely stunned. The monster she had been sold to had just become the only person in the world keeping her alive. February arrived with teeth. Ice coated the windows of the Costa estate, a thick, impenetrable frost that blurred the city lights below into hazy smears. Inside, the climate control kept the ambient temperature at a perfect 70 degrees. But the atmosphere was freezing. The war with the Volkovs had begun. It wasn't a loud, cinematic war. It was fought in the shadows, measured in missed shipments, burnt warehouses, and men who simply didn't come home to their wives. Morgana didn't see the violence, but she felt its tremors. The estate transformed. The skeleton crew of guards tripled. Men in heavy coats and suppressed rifles paced the perimeter of the property line 24 hours a day. The house itself became a war room. Lieutenants came and went at all hours, their boots tracking grey slush onto the pristine hardwood floors. Morgana didn't clean the slush. Not immediately, anyway. Something fundamental had shifted inside her since the night Roman refused to let Miller kill her. The manic, fear-driven need to scrub baseboards evaporated. She was no longer trying to prove her utility to avoid a bullet. She was simply living in the house. Roman, however, was barely living at all. He was a ghost haunting his own home. He stopped sleeping. He existed entirely within the heavy double doors of his office, emerging only to issue rapid, clipped orders to Hayes before disappearing again. When he did come into the kitchen, his face was drawn, the dark circles under his eyes, bruising into a permanent exhaustion. It was a Tuesday night, close to 2 a.m., when Morgana finally crossed the invisible boundary they had drawn between them. She was in the kitchen reading a paperback she had found in the library. The house was quiet, the guards outside shivering in the bitter wind. She heard the heavy thud of Roman's office door opening down the hall. Footsteps approached. Slow, dragging. Roman walked into the kitchen and stopped. He looked at the espresso machine, then at the empty carafe of the drip coffee maker, and finally he just rested his forehead against the cold stainless steel of the refrigerator door. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a man buckling under the invisible weight of a crumbling empire. Morgana put her book down. She didn't ask if he was okay. It was a stupid question to ask a man fighting a mob war. Instead, she stood up, walked past him, and pulled a carton of eggs and a block of cheddar from the fridge he was leaning against. Roman lifted his head, watching her through bloodshot eyes. "What are you doing?" "You're out of coffee," she said smoothly, cracking 3 eggs into a glass bowl. "And caffeine isn't going to fix whatever is happening to your nervous system right now. You need protein. Sit down." It was a command. Roman stared at her. For a second, a flicker of his usual dominant authority flashed across his face, ready to shut her down. But the exhaustion won. He pulled out a bar stool and sat heavily, resting his elbows on the granite island. He watched her cook. The rhythmic whisking of the eggs, the sizzle of butter in the hot pan, the practiced, efficient way she moved. It was domestic, ordinary, completely foreign to the violent chaos dominating his life. She slid a plate of scrambled eggs and toast across the counter. She placed a glass of water next to it. "Eat," she said. Roman picked up the fork. He took a bite. He closed his eyes, chewing slowly. It was the first hot meal he'd had in 3 days. "The Volkovs hit the northern transit hub," Roman said, quietly, his voice raspy. He didn't open his eyes. It was as if he was talking to himself, confessing to the empty air. "Burned 3 trucks. The drivers didn't make it out." Morgana's hand stilled on the edge of the sink. "I'm sorry. Don't be. They knew the risks. I pay them for the risks." He opened his eyes, looking at the half-eaten eggs. "Your father gave the Volkovs the security schedules for all my hubs. That's what he sold me out for. He gave them the blueprint to dismantle me." Morgana felt a familiar spike of shame, hot and bitter. "Have you found him?" "No, he's a rat. Rats know how to hide in the walls." Roman took a drink of water. His gaze drifted up to meet hers. "Hayes thinks I should have killed you. He thinks keeping you here is a distraction, a liability." "Is he right?" "Probably." Roman set the glass down. The hardness returned to his jaw, the ruthless Mafia boss settling back into his skin. But it lacked its usual bite. "But I don't take advice from Hayes on how to run my house." He finished the food in silence. When he was done, he pushed the plate forward and stood up. He looked better. The violent tremor in his hands had vanished. The food grounded him. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't a throwaway, polite gesture. He meant it. "Go to sleep, Roman," she said softly. He paused in the doorway. "Tomorrow Hayes is going to bring you a cell phone. It only has 3 numbers programmed in. Mine, Hayes, and the security gate. Keep it charged. Keep it on you." Morgana frowned. "Why? Because the walls are getting thin." Roman replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "And I don't like liabilities." He walked away. Morgana stared at the empty plate. He called her a liability, but he was giving her a lifeline. It was a contradiction she was slowly learning to navigate. The monster was bleeding, and God help her, she wanted to help him stitch the wounds. The phone in Morgana's pocket vibrated at 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday. She was in the library, dusting the high shelves. She pulled the sleek black device from her jeans. The screen displayed a single name, Hayes. She answered, her stomach twisting into a sudden tight knot. "Hello. Get towels." Hayes barked over the line. The background noise was chaotic tires, screeching, a horn blaring aggressively. "Clean towels. Bottled water. Go to the kitchen and clear the island counter. Move everything. Hayes, what's going on? Just do it. Morgana, 3 minutes. The line went dead. Morgana didn't freeze. The adrenaline hit her bloodstream sharp and cold. She dropped the duster. She ran to the linen closet, grabbing an armful of thick white towels, and sprinted down the hallway to the kitchen. She shoved the fruit bowl, the espresso cups, and the decorative vases onto the floor. Ceramic shattered, but she didn't care. She wiped the massive granite island clean. The front doors blew open. Keep pressure on it. Don't let up! Hayes roared, his massive frame filling the entryway. He wasn't walking alone. He was practically carrying Roman. Roman's arm was slung over Hayes's thick neck. His head hung low, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The left side of Roman's crisp white shirt was gone. Not torn. It was soaked through with a heavy, wet, shining crimson that dripped onto the hardwood floor with every step. "Kitchen!" Hayes yelled, half dragging the boss forward. Morgana stood frozen for a split second, the horror of the blood paralyzing her. But then Jason's voice echoed in her head. "You're useless, Morgana. Just stand there and look stupid." She shook the memory off. She grabbed the stack of towels. "Here," she commanded, pointing to the cleared granite island. "Put him up here." Hayes grunted, lifting Roman with brutal strength and laying him flat on the cold stone. Roman groaned a harsh, guttural sound of pure agony. His eyes were open, but unfocused, glassy with shock. "Hold this," Hayes ordered, grabbing Morgana's hand and pressing it violently against a wadded-up jacket clamped to Roman's left side. "Push down. Harder." Morgana threw her entire body weight against the wound. The fabric was soaked. Hot, sticky blood immediately coated her fingers. The metallic smell of copper filled the kitchen, overpowering the scent of coffee and cleaners. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice remarkably steady, despite the violent shaking in her legs. "Ambush, nay." Hayes spat, pulling a burner phone from his pocket and dialing rapidly. "Meeting at the docks. Supposed to be a sit-down with the union rep. Volkov shooters were waiting in the shipping containers. Boss took one to the ribs. Doc Gallagher is 5 minutes out." Roman coughed. A speck of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Morgana's heart stopped. She pressed harder against his side. "Roman, look at me." His head lolled to the side. His dark, unfocused eyes lazily tracked her face. He blinked, struggling to clear the haze of blood loss. "Morgana, I'm here. Just breathe. Keep breathing." Hayes paced the kitchen, shouting at the perimeter guards over a radio, barking orders to lock down the gates and arm the outer walls. The house was going to war. Roman reached up with his uninjured right hand. His fingers smeared with his own blood, loosely gripped Morgana's wrist where she was pressing down on his wound. "Hayes!" Roman choked out. The sound was weak wet. Hayes dropped the radio, rushing back to the island. "I'm here, boss. Doc is pulling in now." "Get her out!" Roman's grip on Morgana's wrist tightened weakly. He wasn't looking at Hayes. He was staring directly into Morgana's eyes. "Get her out of the house. Put her in the armored sedan. Send her to the safe house in the Berkshires." Hayes hesitated. "Boss, we're locked down. Moving her is a risk." "Do it!" Roman snarled, the exertion costing him a violent shudder of pain. He looked back at Morgana. His eyes were suddenly sharp, desperate. "They know you're here. They know Jason's daughter is the maid. If they breach the gates, they won't just kill you. They'll use you. Go with Hayes." He was giving her an out. In the middle of bleeding to death on his own kitchen counter, Roman Costa was trying to honor his contract. He was trying to protect her. Morgana looked down at him. She looked at his blood covering her hands. She thought about her father. Jason would have pushed her in front of the bullet to save himself. Jason had sold her for poker chips. Roman took the bullet, and his first thought was her extraction. No, Morgana said. Hayes blinked, pausing his frantic pacing. Roman gritted his teeth. Morgana, don't be stupid. Get in the car. No, she repeated. She leaned down closer to his face, applying more pressure to the wound. I'm not running. I'm not Jason. I don't abandon people when the bill comes due. Roman stared at her. The anger in his eyes slowly dissolved into something entirely different. A profound, terrifying realization. He saw her, not as a debt, not as a hostage, but as an equal force of will. Before he could argue, the kitchen doors burst open. Dr. Gallagher, a thin man carrying a massive black trauma bag, rushed in, followed by 2 armed guards. Move! Gallagher barked, shoving Hayes aside. He looked at Morgana. Keep the pressure. Don't move your hands until I tell you. Morgana nodded, her jaw locked tight. For the next 45 minutes, the kitchen became an operating room. Morgana didn't flinch. She held the pressure. She handed Gallagher forceps and gauze when he barked for them. She watched as he dug a 9mm slug out of Roman's ribcage. Through it all, Roman didn't pass out. He bit down on a leather belt Hayes handed him, his eyes locked on Morgana. She didn't look away. She anchored him to the room. When it was finally over, Gallagher stitched the wound, pumped Roman full of antibiotics and heavy painkillers, and instructed Hayes to move him to a sterile bed. He's lucky, Gallagher told Hayes, wiping blood off his glasses. An inch to the right, it shatters the spleen. Keep him flat. If he runs a fever, call me. Hayes nodded, lifting Roman carefully. Roman was fighting the morphine, struggling to stay conscious, as Hayes carried him towards the stairs. He looked back over his shoulder. Morgana was standing by the ruined granite island. Her black scrubs were ruined. Her arms were covered in his blood up to the elbows. She looked exhausted, pale, and entirely resolute. You should have run. Roman slurred softly, his head resting heavily against Hayes's shoulder. Morgana walked over to the sink and turned on the hot water. She watched his blood wash off her skin and spiral down the drain. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said. She turned off the tap, and for the first time since she arrived at the Costa estate, Morgana didn't go to her room and lock the door. She walked upstairs, following the trail of blood, and sat in the chair beside Roman's bed. She was going to hold the line. Roman didn't leave his bed for 6 days. The fever hit him on the 2nd night, a raging venomous heat that soaked the sheets in sweat and made him delirious. Morgana didn't leave the chair beside his bed. When he thrashed, tearing at his stitches, she held his shoulders down with all her weight. When he called out for people she didn't know, names of dead men from a past he had buried, she placed a cool, damp washcloth against his forehead until his breathing leveled out. She became the gatekeeper. Hayes and Miller ran the street war from the kitchen, but they only entered the master bedroom when Morgana allowed it. The men didn't question her. They had seen her bathed in his blood, holding the line while they panicked. In their brutal transactional world, she had earned her place. She wasn't the maid anymore. By the end of the 2nd week, Roman was sitting up. By the 3rd, he was working from the leather armchair by the window, a laptop balanced on his uninjured thigh. The bruising on his ribs was an ugly, mottled yellow, and he moved with a stiff, guarded caution. But the sharpness had returned to his eyes. The Volkovs had missed their shot. Now Roman was systematically dismantling them. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the war finally dragged Jason to the front door. Morgana was in the kitchen brewing green tea. The heavy oak doors of the entryway slammed open. She heard a scuffle, the dull thud of a fist hitting bone, and a sharp, pathetic yelp. She walked out to the foyer. Hayes had Jason by the scruff of his filthy winter coat. He tossed the older man onto the hardwood floor like a sack of garbage. Jason scrambled backward, his boots squeaking against the polished wood until his back hit the wall. He looked terrible. His face was hollow, covered in grey stubble. His eyes were bloodshot and darting frantically around the room. Miller stood by the door, wiping a smudge of blood off his knuckles. Found him trying to board a Greyhound to Cleveland. He was sleeping behind a dumpster 2 blocks from the station. Roman stood at the top of the glass staircase. He moved slowly, his left arm resting rigidly against his stomach, but his presence was absolute. He looked down at the trembling man on his floor. "Jason," Roman said. The name dropped into the silence like a stone down a well. Jason looked up, squinting against the bright lights of the house. Then he saw Morgana standing near the kitchen entrance. Morgana. Jason scrambled to his knees, holding his hands out toward her in a desperate plea. "Morgana, thank God. Tell them. Tell them I'm your father. Tell them they can't do this to me." Morgana didn't move. She held the warm ceramic mug in both hands, letting the heat seep into her palms. She looked at the man who had raised her. She looked for the fear she used to feel. She looked for the pity she thought she owed him. There was nothing, just a profound, echoing emptiness. "You aren't my father, Jason," she said, her voice perfectly calm. "You're just a man who lived in the same house until you sold me." Jason blanched. "I had to. They were going to kill me, Morgana. You know that. I did it to keep us both alive." "You did it because you're a coward." Roman interrupted softly, descending the stairs 1 careful step at a time. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom. "You sold her to me, then you sold my roots to the Volkovs. You took a payout to let them put a bullet in my ribs." "I didn't know," Jason sobbed, pressing his hands against his face. "They just wanted the schedules. They said they were going to rob the trucks, not shoot you. I swear to God, Costa, I didn't know it was a hit." "It doesn't matter what you knew," Roman said. He looked at Hayes. "Take him out back." Hayes stepped forward, his massive hand reaching for Jason's collar. "Wait," Morgana said. Hayes froze, looking up at Roman for confirmation. Roman didn't say a word. He just shifted his gaze to Morgana, yielding the floor. Morgana walked forward. She stopped a few feet from Jason. He looked up at her, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. He looked so small. For 22 years, this man had been the monster in her closet. He had dictated her worth, controlled her terror, and bartered her life. Now he was just a pathetic degenerate, begging on a billionaire's floor. "Morgana, please." Jason whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm your blood. My blood," Morgana repeated. She thought about the blood she had washed off her hands 3 weeks ago. Roman's blood. Blood spilled because this man couldn't stop taking. "You owe the Volkovs, don't you? The money they paid you, you gambled it away while you were hiding." Jason swallowed hard, looking away. That was all the confirmation she needed. She looked up at Roman. "If you kill him, you do the Volkovs a favor. You clean up their mess. If I let him live, he remains a loose end." Roman replied evenly. "He's a liability. Only if he's here." Morgana looked back down at Jason. "He has no money, no protection. The Volkovs know he failed because you're still breathing. They'll be looking for him. If you throw him out that door, he won't make it a week on his own." Jason's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Morgana, no. They'll skin me alive. You can't let them put me out there. You have to hide me." "I don't have to do anything," she said softly. She turned away from him, walking back towards the kitchen. "Open the front door, Hayes. Throw him out." "Morgana!" Jason screamed, thrashing wildly, as Hayes grabbed him by the belt and dragged him towards the heavy oak doors. "You ungrateful bitch, I fed you, I kept a roof over your head, Morgana." The doors opened to the biting March wind. Hayes hurled Jason onto the concrete driveway. "Don't come back," Haas grunted, "or the boss won't be the one deciding what happens to you." The doors slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked. The house plunged back into silence. Roman remained on the stairs. He watched Morgana standing in the kitchen doorway. She was staring at her tea, her shoulders perfectly relaxed. She hadn't flinched when Jason screamed. "Are you all right?" Roman asked quietly. Morgana looked up. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. It was the first time he had ever seen her smile. "The house is clean," she said. April brought rain that washed the last of the grey slush and the spilled blood from the city streets. The war ended in a boardroom, not an alley. Roman spent 3 days in Chicago, and by the time he returned, the Volkov leadership had been isolated and systematically erased. The estate stood down. The perimeter guards vanished. The lieutenants stopped tracking mud into the foyer. But inside the house, the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. A heavy, expectant tension hung in the air. On a Thursday morning, Roman found Morgana in the library. He was back in his tailored charcoal suits. The brutal exhaustion finally faded from his face. He looked whole again. "My office," he said. He didn't wait for an answer. Morgana wiped her hands on her jeans and followed him. It was the one room she had always been explicitly forbidden from entering. The heavy double doors opened to a space that smelled of old paper and faint cigar smoke. Roman stood behind a massive mahogany desk holding a manila folder. He tossed it onto the wood. It landed with a soft slap. "That is your father's ledger," Roman said. He pulled a heavy silver lighter from his pocket, sparked the flame, and touched it to the corner of the top page. Morgana watched in stunned silence as the paper curled and blackened, flaking into ash inside a heavy glass tray. "The debt is paid," Roman said, watching the fire die. "Your father's tab is closed. The Volkovs are gone. There is no one looking for you. You don't owe me a dime." He slid a thick white envelope across the desk. "There's $20,000 in there. Cash. It's a severance package. Hayes is pulling the SUV around. He'll take you wherever you want to go." Morgana stared at the envelope. It was freedom. It was everything she had prayed for when she was shivering in the back of his car 5 months ago. So why did it feel like the floor was collapsing beneath her? "You're firing me," she said, her voice hollow. "I'm freeing you," Roman corrected. His voice was steady, but there was a harsh, rigid tightness in his jaw. He was forcing the detachment. "You were collateral, Morgana, a hostage to ensure a coward's good behavior. The coward is gone. The contract is void. I saved your life, which is why you're walking out of here with 20 grand instead of a bus ticket." Roman replied coldly. "You won. Take the money and go live a life that doesn't involve bulletproof glass." She looked at the faint, uneven line of the bullet scar just visible above his collarbone. She had spent her entire life trying to escape monsters. But Roman wasn't a monster. He was a man holding up a very dark sky, and she had helped him hold it. She picked up the envelope. "Okay," she whispered. She went upstairs to her bedroom. She pulled her worn duffel bag from under the bed. She didn't pack the expensive clothes he had bought her. She packed her 2 pairs of jeans, her worn sweaters, and the framed photo of her mother. She left the black scrubs neatly folded on the edge of the mattress. She walked downstairs. The heavy front doors were open, the spring breeze blowing into the foyer. Beyond the threshold, the black SUV idled in the driveway, Hayes standing stoically by the rear door. Roman stood in the foyer, waiting to see her out. He looked like a man bracing for a car crash. Morgana walked to the threshold. The air outside smelled like wet pavement. It smelled like her old life, unpaid bills, double shifts, and running from shadows. She stopped. She turned around. Morgana let the duffel bag slide off her shoulder. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. Roman blinked, his stoic mask slipping. "Morgana Hayes is waiting." "I don't care," she said. She stepped away from the open door, crossing the foyer, until she was standing inches from his chest. "I told you," Roman said, his voice dropping to a rough, desperate whisper. The debt is paid. You don't have to stay. I know. Morgana replied, meeting his dark eyes without an ounce of hesitation. But I'm not a hostage anymore, and I don't work for you. No. Then I don't need a room with a lock. Roman stopped breathing. The air between them crackled with a terrifying, raw honesty. He searched her face, looking for fear, obligation, or trauma. He found a woman who had held his blood in her hands and made a choice. Slowly, Roman reached out. His large, scarred hands cupped her face, his thumbs gently tracing her jawline. If you stay. Roman whispered, his forehead resting against hers. You don't leave. I won't let you leave. I'm not a good man, Morgana. I don't want a good man. Morgana whispered back, her hands coming up to grip his wrists, anchoring him to her. I just want you. Roman closed his eyes, a ragged breath escaping his chest as the tension of the last 5 months finally shattered. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. Outside, Hayes slowly pulled the heavy oak doors shut, the deadbolt clicking into place, leaving them entirely alone. That's it for the incredible journey of Morgana and Roman. From a terrified hostage sold to settle a gambling debt to the queen of a Mafia empire, she didn't just survive the darkness, she learned how to rule it. If this intense, slow-burn romance had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Who was your favorite character, and did Jason get what he deserved? Let me know down in the comments. And don't forget to share this video with your fellow dark romance fans. See you in the next one.